Here's what you missed this week on The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa, on Iowa Catholic Radio. The Uncommon Good coming at you for 8 years, and we're glad that you are joining us. As always, I got myself here. Who's me? Bo Bonner. You know me probably from the Catholic Morning Show here on Iowa Catholic Radio. To my right, just so you know, within where we're recording, who's this gentleman right here? Identify yourself, sir.
This is Bud Marr. You probably know me from academic affairs. You might not, but I do work at Mercy College of Health Sciences, downtown Des Moines.
We are the Uncommon Good. We are brought to you by Imogene Ingredients. We want to say thank you to Imogene Ingredients.
Hey-o.
Hey, one of the things that we want to say thank you for, not only for underwriting the show, but for anybody who gets a chance to interact with them. If you have cattle, livestock, and you need them to be nutritionized, you should go talk to the good folks at Imogene Ingredients. Thanks, folks, for making this possible.
My thoughts have actually been on Imogene this week, even outside of the recording of the show, because this summer has been kind of crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It's sweltering. There's been a lot of rain, which I appreciate. But I'm sure, farming and cattle raising, it's always kind of, it's not like that the day-to-day just, routine grind.
No.
You never know what you're going to get.
Every day an adventure, and it can be as adventurous as some animal getting caught literally in floodwaters, all the way to it's just sort of wet outside and it doesn't sit well with their hooves. So every day is something. And then when you're right, when it's hot, when it's too dry, they're thirsty. But you just got to be on your toes. Imogene Ingredient makes it possible. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us here on The Uncommon Good. Tip of the hat one more time to Imogene Ingredients for making the show possible. Bud, we've been talking about religion and technology for quite a bit this year, right? And I think we sufficiently made technology angry enough. Let's tell the good folks that what we're recording today, we actually have already recorded once. We'll get into it, but just to give some prehistory, it was a pretty rockin' show. Just to give the sort of technical aspects, we weren't able to do it in person together, so we had you calling in.
Yeah.
And when we recorded it, it sounded great, but upon playback, you sounded you did not sound like you. I don't want to say lisp because that's an official linguistic thing and people struggle with, but let me just say that the end of every word you spoke was either inaudible or just quite frankly strange. And, I know you personally and knew that you weren't having linguistic troubles. So it was one of those things where I think we could have tried to play the show, but I honestly think people would have either called or wrote in and asked if you were okay.
Okay.
It was that much of a technical issue. But I don't know, after talking about technology long enough, it's probably fitting that it struck, got its revenge on us at least once, right?
I was disappointed to hear that because I did like the show. I'm not a big, so I should say this. I was going to say I'm not a big spiritual warfare guy, but I've met Christians who over-apply spiritual warfare. For instance, when I was in high school, our team was losing a basketball game. I didn't make varsity, so I was on the sidelines. And I was like, man, it was a rough first half out there, to one of the other fans. And she said, she saw a demon that was, swatting away shots from the hoop.
We had I have to tell our story, too. We had a basketball game where we had this coach for 1 year, and he was a maniac, and he was just a bad fit, to say the least. But one time he heard the other team warming up in the locker room to Marilyn Manson, and so he said, of course, we're going to win, and then we got slaughtered. Yeah. So I'm with you. Quick lesson, adults. Don't add spiritual warfare where it's not happening. Maybe you're just bad at basketball.
But the point is, with these examples, is I do think in this case, maybe it was such a good show, that someone was running interference.
We really got into it, so I guess
that's
we'll see.
That's a safe conjecture.
Yeah.
What inspired that show was a conversation between Peter Thiel and Ross Douthat, and Douthat writes for the New York Times. He's considered sort of like the token conservative editorialist for the New York Times.
Which is always sort of I mean, it's always sort of a kind of like, where do you put people when, one of the big sort of newspapers calls you conservative, but generally so, I think that's what he would be considered.
He's a practicing Catholic. You can tell he cares a lot about his faith. I think in today's political spectrum, it's fair to call him a conservative. We're all finding our way. But he had a conversation with Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel, how did he make his money? It was PayPal, right?
Yeah, let's tell people who Peter Thiel is, or try in a succinct way.
He's a quite wealthy, I think the phrase normally uses like technocrat.
Tech billionaire, at least.
Yeah, right.
And you're right. So he made his money off of early development of PayPal and then selling it at like the right moment or something. And he has had plenty of money ever since.
I've lost track of his recent ventures, but I think he's continued to make a lot of money.
Palantir, right? That's the big one that keeps coming up.
Yeah.
And what that is sort of up in the air. It's the one of the most techie of techinessness. You hear a lot about future plans that they're up to, but maybe not necessarily like anything you or I or the average Joe on the street's going to go to the Apple apps and buy.
But he's interesting in this sense. So you can imagine like a technocrat like that making a lot of money and then spending most of their time on a yacht, sort of enjoying life. He's someone who's become interested, or like stretching back to his Stanford days. He studied at Stanford in the thought of René Girard, this French anthropologist / literary critic who we've talked about on the show. Girard has a lot of interesting ideas about scapegoat mechanisms and just sort of like
religion,
human
violence,
culture more generally.
Yeah, myth.
Right. And so
but you're leaving out a big one. What's the one that old Pete's really interested in?
Well, yeah, right. This is the lost episode. This is the B-side, but we talked a lot about Thiel's fascination with the Antichrist,
which he gets to be fair, this is not just like he, had the wind flap open the Bible and then put his finger down. This also is very much something that René Girard himself talked about, the Antichrist. He talked about it in a very sociological and anthropological way. I mean, Girard certainly through the last half of his career was unapologetically Catholic, understood himself as a religious believer. But Antichrist, he really did sort of try to talk about, I would say, in social organizational terms. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And
so it's not unreasonable to have a Girardian or someone who's studied under Girard, no matter how secular they might be. And let's be also frank, Peter Thiel considers himself a Christian. He himself happens to be homosexual, is married to a man. So that, of course, sort of adds layers upon like where exactly does he fit in the American Christian scene. I'm just describing sort of the lay of the land here. But it's not untold for even the most secular, non-believing follower of Girard to talk about the Antichrist, or even for it to come up more in dialogue than maybe people would assume otherwise. However, it certainly is something he has been more and more interested in and willing to very publicly speak about, including when he is interviewed by Ross Douthat, knowing very well what he's going to say will end up in the New York Times.
Yeah, and the Antichrist is a figure that looms large in Scripture. Like there are portions of the New Testament that get into this. I think it's St. John who says like the mark of the Antichrist is that he denies the incarnation, that our Lord like came in the flesh. Later on, like commentary on those sorts of passages, I think Ignatius of Antioch says like those who sort of like refuse or deny the idea of the real presence, they're sort of like taking up that idea and running with it. But there's some in the New Testament. The New Testament remarks are sort of mysterious and require unpacking. Over the subsequent centuries, there's been a lot written about the Antichrist. And Bo, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the sense that I get is that for Christian theologians, there's been this idea that the Antichrist would wield the sort of like power of our Lord, but it would be a facade. And so the Antichrist, whereas Christ sort of like ultimately kind of like denied the pathway that Satan presented to him of like salvation through just like the sheer exercise of power, the Antichrist will offer a kind of peace and harmony for all of humanity, but it will come at expense of the truth.
Yeah, so very much a false peace. And, this is developed in myriad ways depending on which part of Catholic theology you're looking at. So it can be as it were, personal as the Benedictine order that makes a big deal about making sure to never give a false peace, because a false peace, even in interpersonal relationships, is a mark of the Antichrist, right? To say something is resolved when it's not, all the way to sort of architectonic, civilization-wide, who is the Antichrist? And I think it's fair to say Christians, since the Industrial Revolution, increasingly more since we're getting into the wheelhouse of what we've been talking about with information technology, people have been throwing out technologies specifically as candidates for Antichrist for 100+ years now. Mm-hmm. The telegraph is Antichrist. Radio, television, certainly when you have seemingly a talking robot that tricks people, it's going to be obvious that some people go like, no, this is the mark of the beast. This is Antichrist. You and I, of course, grew up in Christian traditions where reading Revelation allegorically and like in a near 1-to-1 ratio with images from Revelation needing to be borne out in the day that the day's politics are very that was something that people to do. And so one of the things that, of course, you and I grew up that maybe Catholics didn't is constant sort of observation and guesswork about who is the Antichrist or who will be the Antichrist or where will the Antichrist come from. In John, it's just very principled that, like you said, the Antichrist will promise the peace and say many of the things that our Lord did, but will at heart refuse to say that they're won through the cross and through the crucifixion. And that was, so the telltale sign of Antichrist is you can have your cake and eat it too in many ways.
Yeah, that's a good summary. And it gets connected to, there's the little apocalypse in the Gospels where our Lord talks about the last days. There's this idea that like the deception will be very great, that if the days weren't cut short, even the elect would be deceived. And what's jumped out to you and I when we heard this conversation with Peter Theil, and also in writings and talks that he's given before this, is that he's kind of consistently warned about the Antichrist as this like looming phenomenon, but there are elements of his own thought that sort of track that direction. And what I specifically have in mind, so I think you've done a good job in recent years of saying like one element of Pope Francis' pontificate that is likely to stand the test of time is his warnings about the technocratic paradigm.
Yeah.
And Francis points out that because of the power of technology, that with a lot of the issues that we face in society today, they get refracted through that lens. That it's just natural that we sort of seek a kind of liberation through technology. And then as problems arise, we sort of like get closed in on this vicious circle where it's like, oftentimes this is all like the stuff of sci-fi films too. Like technologies create our problems, and then we sort of think we can like dig ourselves out of that hole by the use of more technology. Yes. But Peter Thiel, he gets into this sort of thing. So he's someone who's, I think, it's fair to say has been like concerned about or interested in transhumanism. We've talked about that some on the show, but also, kind of like Elon Musk, funding or thinking about applying like venture capitalist projects to like space exploration because of this idea that like the Earth itself might be exhausted by human activity. So we have to have some sort of eject plan.
I think that is what starts to be really interesting, is bringing up Antichrist or the Antichrist in such a way that sort of runs counterintuitive to what a lot of people assume the Antichrist or Antichrist will look like. So just to reflect, one more time, to bring him up, someone that we talk about all the time, John Henry Newman in his 10th discourse on the idea of the university, he talks about the power of medicine. Mm-hmm. And like I always like to point out to people, when did he write that? But it was 1854.
Yeah, it's right in that.
Yeah, I mean,
window.
So this is not when medicine is like
just
going on all cylinders like it is now. But he said the problem with medicine is going to be its success, that it's so good at talking about human body and understanding the human body that it's going to sort of absorb other sciences that aren't proper to it because it can answer its own questions so well. And that, but to me is like another way to say this is what Antichrist does. I'm not trying to say that, like, you know, modern universities are Antichrist. I'm saying there's this element in Christianity that is always saying, you know, if anybody overpromises success without the difficulty of the cross, that you should be wary of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, Peter Thiel, I think it's very, like, on this part, I think it's interesting that he brings this up. This is not to say agreeing with his big program, but he makes the point, like, isn't it the case that in the New Testament, and certainly how someone like Girard brings it up, that the Antichrist is going to, as it were, say or fulfill what everybody's already thinking.
Yeah.
And so he says he's worried that the Antichrist is actually going to be an anti-technology Luddite. So, you know, and I mean, let's be honest, again, without getting into the politics of this, it's obviously the case that in the last half decade, if not, you know, extended out more decades, what's one of the most popular sort of political discourses right now, Bud? And it's distrust of the institution of medicine. You know, that something very much, you know, like, again, like, not to get into like the specifics, but the polio vaccine, right, like, has done something that no human technology did before, which is eradicate something that used to routinely kill children.
Right.
And it's success that has now fomented movements pushing back.
Yeah.
And so we could, of course, say, like, oh, well, that's what you want, a healthy society. I mean, this is exactly what Newman, in some ways, is pointing out, is like, you shouldn't let medicine's power act like it can answer all questions. But Thiel says it's, of course, going to be people worried about technology and their fundamental anxieties about it that Antichrist will exploit.
Oh, wow.
And that's what he's trying, like, you know, that's what he is largely saying to Ross Douthat, is he goes, look, the Antichrist is going to come on the scene and make everybody think that we need to be anti-tech, when actually it's these. This is why he says there's been this stagnation he kept talking about.
Yep.
Which, again, you know, we made a big deal about this in the episode that we don't have. I feel like we're Tenacious D, right? Where we're like, this is a tribute to the best song of the world.
We're just going to keep, like, dangling this in front of audience's faces, like, you should have really heard that one that got deleted.
Dude, like, this is going to be like 40 years from now when they're doing the Bo and Bud archives. Someone's going to dig this up, and they're like, we had to translate Bud's voice.
It's kind of funny to me. It's like the Valentine gift that I didn't get my wife.
Yeah.
Like, what I had in my mind, honey, was
it was
out of this world.
That was the best, right? You know,
enjoy your half dozen flowers.
Yeah. So at any rate, in this best episode we ever recorded, but it didn't work. That was one of the things I thought that we were right to alight on first is Thiel thinks that we've lived in decades of stagnation. And Bud, like, just with more time to reflect on that, I don't think that's an easier pill to swallow. Do you look at your life and think, man, this has been 4 decades of technological stagnation?
I know. I think most Americans walking around today, they feel like things have changed very rapidly and feel kind of disoriented by, especially the way that we communicate and relate to each other. I kind of get his point. Like, some of his examples landed. What did he say? Like, if you think about medicine.
Yeah, cancer research.
Yeah, cancer research has not really advanced. I think he brought up Alzheimer's too.
Yep.
And I, you know, in a certain way, I sort of wondered if he was appealing to Douthat, because one of Douthat's major books is about decadence.
Yeah.
Sort of that we've become such a decadent society that there's not this kind of, like, you have both sort of like the slowdown of producing new citizens, like this kind of like the demographic winter combined with, I don't know, like a lot of people felt like in the like post World War II, there was kind of this boom both of the population and of innovation, and maybe less innovation. But
you know what I thought you were going to bring up, because you're right. Like, it's precisely that, because he by name brings up decadence multiple times. I thought you were going to bring up the fact that Douthat, of course, very famously, I think the book before, wrote about getting
Lyme disease.
Right. And so you're right that would be this sort of like background thing that he's pointing out, is like, oh, we haven't made progress on Lyme disease either. And I mean, you know, on one hand, if you wanted to be like a real technical nerd, on all of those diseases, we've had advancements. They're very elemental diseases, why they're so hard to do anything about. But I'll grant him this in the wide sense. You know, I think you and I bet are all related to someone who has Lyme disease or Alzheimer's or cancer.
Right.
And it's absolutely the case that, you know, we haven't made progress with them like we did with polio.
But it is kind of, I think, a rhetorical move to garner support for his project of, like, really accelerating technology along certain lines.
Yeah, and the reason I think we'll finish talking about this, but in the second half of the show, I think what we're going to have to get at is this sounds like it's positive, right? That he's saying like, oh, we need to get back on the horse and make some new innovation. But underneath it is a very skeptical, pessimistic assessment of a lot.
And as you were talking earlier, I didn't think about this as we recorded the Lost episode, but he has, I mean, it's within the realm of possibility that we don't think of it in these terms because in today's culture, we very much love newness and innovation. But I think about Arthur Miller's Canticle for Leibowitz.
Oh, yeah.
And in that novel, I think there's some sort of like nuclear disaster. He doesn't really fully reveal sort of like what caused this dystopian future. But in the face of whatever happened, there is a total rejection of sort of like science and scholarly learning because human beings become fearful of like just the sheer power of what they can accomplish through like the scientific breakthroughs that were made.
Walter Miller.
Sorry about that.
Arthur Miller wrote, he did Catch-22, I think. Any rate.
No, I'm not, well, not Catch-22, but I think he is a playwright.
Yeah.
Anyways, two very different authors.
But your point being, so you are alighting upon something that literature certainly has picked up on. So Canticle of Leibowitz has this, there's a nuclear disaster, so it's important to throw out science for a while. And then like one of the timelines, as it were, being explored in that novel is people have said, okay, we need to do science again. And like, are they learning the lesson from last time, et cetera. But Dune, which is, of course, this other huge science fiction sort of phenomenon, they have what was called the Butlerian Jihad, where they essentially fought a war against artificial intelligence and robots, and they have subsequently banned any sort of intelligence or robotics, which is why in Dune World, whether you've read the book or seen the movies, there aren't robots like there are in like Star Wars or Star Trek.
Well, that's what's so funny to me is the Catholic Church, I think, regularly gets kind of like this specter of being kind of Luddite is thrown out there. And people go back to like the Galileo case. And I think even with someone like Francis, who was kind of like prophetic in this regard, it's like, oh, like you don't like your pacemaker or whatnot.
Right.
But actually what he's warning about is, as we were sort of joking about earlier, is like a consistent thread through like science fiction films and novels that our technology might outpace our ethical sensibilities, or it could turn on us in some sense. I mean, this goes back to Frankenstein.
Yes.
But certainly, like, I grew up with tons of movies that were sort of just warning you about trying to solve things through the through the development of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and that goes into sort of, you know, our sort of stated worries in multiple episodes about the sort of instrumentalization, the utilitarianization of all human endeavors. I do, again, want to say, to be fair, though, I think Peter Thiel's insistence that it can go the other way.
Yeah.
And so this goes into virtue, right? That maybe we shouldn't be tech utopias, but maybe we shouldn't be like Luddite, know nothing, completely against whatever, not even progress in the sort of narrative that it has, but just inquiry, right? That we believe in rationality, we believe in human inquiry, and we believe that God gave us the ability to, make observations and improve on them. But he is very much, he really does think and says straight out, he thinks the Antichrist is going to take the sort of jump on that wave of our worries about technology in order to get to present themselves as a savior from technology.
Yeah.
And so he's benighted himself as the watchdog for this Luddite Antichrist that he thinks is around the corner. This is very interesting, to say the least, because it takes some assumptions that most of the people in the streets don't buy, like we've talked about, that he believes that there's this decadence, that he believes there's a lull in innovation. And so are we needing to watch out for a Luddite Antichrist? Or should you maybe, just to preview what's coming up next, worry about the Antichrist going around talking about, for instance, the Antichrist all the time. We'll talk about this more. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Bud, who are we very thankful for underwriting our show?
Imogene Ingredients.
They're good guys.
I agree. I go to church with some of them.
Yeah.
But I think they're doing just yeoman's work out in the community with, we mentioned the cattle angle.
On the behalf of livestock.
Right. We live in an agricultural state. A&F, I do not root for the Iowa Hawkeyes, but I do affirm their helmet decal. America needs farmers.
Well, America, according to Peter Theil, also needs a guy running around worried about the Antichrist. That's what we've been talking about today. We're referring back to the lost episode that will now hopefully live in lore, Bud, that we recorded an episode, and it happened to be of near unusable quality, so we thought it was best just to re-record the episode and talk about what was going on. So we have in mind, particularly, Peter Theil, Tech Billionaire, Rene Girard, interpreter, has an interview with Ross Douthat, conservative, however you want to ultimately understand that moniker, conservative commentator from New York Times. This is a straight-up interview. Like, you can actually see the video, but also you can read the long form. It's all up online. But I think that this...
One of the great blessings of this show is being able to talk about these things in a Catholic light on air. And as we were talking, so I want to harken back to you and I helped give a retreat last weekend. And on the retreat, it was great because as you were talking, you ended up threading a lot of Homer into your talk. Like you must have like been thinking about the Iliad and the Odyssey
I'm
recently.
always thinking of it.
But I almost turned to the guys at the retreat and were like, where else on a Saturday morning can you just get like in-depth Homer analysis? But I love the idea of like, Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, Sunday afternoon, like someone just driving through central Iowa and all of a sudden landing on Peter Thiel / Antichrist / technocratic paradigm talk.
You heard it here, folks, first, and where are you going to get it in such an easy way? By hearing it on the airwaves, or if you go to iowacatholicradio.com, you can listen to the podcast anytime, anywhere after we upload it.
But you kind of gave a great teaser before the break about, like, if someone's consistently warning about the Antichrist, like, maybe your antennas should be up. And I think that's fair with Thiel. Sorry, Peter Thiel, if you're listening to this episode. But, like, a really sort of, like, arresting moment in the conversation between Peter Thiel and Ross Douthat.
And this is what I was going to bring up, because, like, I think this is the thing that even if you don't know what we're talking about, it was all over social media. This event, this thing you're getting ready to bring up.
I mean, Ross kind of picked up on this like misanthropic thread through some of what Peter was saying.
At least worries about humanity's ability to take care of itself, to say the least.
And you could tell that Thiel was also throwing out some sort of like radical ideas about how to navigate these waters. And so Douthat said like something to the effect like, do you want humanity, qua humanity, like the human race, to persist?
And persist is the word he used.
And Thiel kind of, hesitated. And I think Douthat goes, that's a long hesitation.
Yeah, and I mean, hesitation is like an understatement. It looked like maybe if he was eating Pringles, I thought he would have been choking. He like had a hard time proceeding with what was going on. And like, I'm not laughing to make fun of a guy, but I'm laughing uncomfortably, because this is the point in a movie. If life was a movie, this is like the end of the second act when the villain starts laughing, can't keep the act up that he's actually the good guy. I mean, it was.
But where do you think that comes from? I know you've looked at some of his stuff. Like Thiel sort of like presents himself as someone who's at the cutting edge of presenting solutions to humanity.
Yeah, so to be as charitable as possible, because of course, but let's just like talk about the elephant in the room. The uncharitable read is he doesn't want humanity to persist.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, that's, you can't, I mean, if you're going to go talk on the New York Times and your goal is to trick people, presumably you'd practice your poker face a bit more. So I'm going to be charitable and say The reason he had a hard time answering, I want the human race to persist, is probably because he's far more of a transhumanist than we realize. And so we should make sure to get into, what that means exactly. Transhumanism, and the thing is he brings this up in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. He brings up actually transgenderism, and I forget exactly where he's even bringing it up, but he brings up the idea that, like, within transgenderism, the idea is, you can believe that, like, you weren't, that your body doesn't conform to what your mind thinks about yourself, and so you adapt your body to that state that you believe. But he brings it up for this sole purpose, which is to say, he says, I do not believe the transgenderists go far enough. We need to say, why wouldn't we do whatever it took to change our bodies in order to overcome whatever deficits we currently have? And this is after he had this big, long conversation about going to parties in the 90s where, like, rich people were talking about when they die freezing their heads so that they can be reanimated later. What he doesn't talk about is that group, transhumanists, right, are largely people who believe, Ray Kurzweil or something like this. They believe in a thing called the singularity, which is the idea that at some point humans will have transformed material reality enough that we'll be able to upload our consciences, not our conscious, our consciousnesses, into this computer realm, and then attain eternity. Well, maybe not. Maybe they might not say eternity, but we will no longer be bound by the time boundness, the ability to be hurt, the sort of limits that the body and the brain currently give us, and that will overcome all of these things by doing that. So Peter Thiel goes, the reason he hesitates is he's not all that concerned, actually, if humanity in its current state persists, because he thinks we can overcome that. And the reason I know that's the case is he immediately goes into saying, well, Christians believe this too, which is, let's be honest, at least fancy interpretation of Christianity. But he essentially says, well, he's saying when Paul talks about a glorified body, he goes, isn't that all? He's essentially saying, isn't that what transhumanists are trying to do? Is make a glorified body by uploading our consciousnesses into, the singularity, and then maybe put it in a robot body or put it in a lot of bodies, or the sky's the limit at that point. But that's why he hesitates, because I do believe he very frankly thinks that what we are doing now, what we are now, we will overcome. So humanity as it is now, I don't think he thinks it will persist.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out at this point that he's given a lot of money to politicians. And I say that, so the purpose of this episode is not fear Peter Thiel, the boogeyman, but just he's part of this circle that they're not just like some nerds like brainstorming in their basements. Like, these things matter to them a lot. And they have photo ops with very powerful figures in the world. It's funny because Thiel is not sort of like what you would envision as like the standard like Republican shill or whatnot. But he's like, he's sort of like hedging his bets and thinking like, well, this could be a good investment if I'm able to take some of these ideas and gain some traction with them in the political realm. I like the way that you put it. Like, when we think about the Antichrist, we were talking about like sort of salvation, but apart from the cross. So you talked some about transhumanism. You talked about a glorified body. And I think that's where Thiel, at the end of the day, the solution that he seeks is, it's almost Pelagian in the sense like it's a purely human sort of
endeavor.
Yeah.
And Manichaean.
Right.
But like inverse Manichaeanism.
But our glorified body, that's something that God will bring about through his own power. And we talked about this at the retreat last weekend, but like, we have to think about heaven as, of course, like a different sort of reality that we know now, but there will be something fundamentally continuous about it. So if you think about like how the book of Revelation talks about the Lamb who was slain since the beginning of the world. So like Christ's sacrifice, yes, it took place, in the first century, and there's a historical moment, but there's something perpetual about that, or like eternal, that we could say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, for Christians, like, we talk about a glorified body and we look forward to that hope. When the faithful departed die, like, we still, like, we honor their bodies, because human beings are, I mean, our lives are, we're bodies who are animated by a life-giving principle that we call the soul, but we're not a ghost in a machine. And I don't know, like, I'm still trying to, like, sort of unpack or make sense in my mind of exactly what Theil has in view. But I think it's sort of like this liberation through the power of science, which is different than the salvation that we talk about.
Well, so look, Gnosis, or the Gnostics, they take a particular shape throughout history. They take shape in every age. But I actually think, like, to tie this into, like, some of the things that we've been talking about persistently, I think Gnostics usually are shaped by both A, the communication technologies that are regnant at the time, and B, the sort of political anxieties they always face. So isn't it interesting, right, that the Gnostics that are sort of the Manichaeans, Faustians, that Augustine, for instance, is facing, what are they all? What are all of them? They're all rhetoricians, which is the dominant media form of the age, right? People who have access to text, but remember, not everybody does, so they have to, like, learn and memorize these texts, and then they go and they speak, right? They are the sort of cutting edge of media technology at their time. And so isn't it weird that Augustine falls into this because he's trained as a rhetorician and he's having all these talks of rhetoricians? I think it would be interesting to think about how Gnosticism post the printing press, and sort of like how that starts to, like, show up in certain Protestant sects, but how it ends up in sort of Cartesianism. It's easy to start thinking, right, that there's a dualism, right? There's, like, the physical book, but actually all the book is sort of like a dead husk, so you can encounter the ideas written upon it, right? So I think that every age has a Gnosticism that really gloms onto the particularity of the dominant media of the time. This is why I think it's providential that God had us lose that episode, because you're right. After having this retreat, I think the better way to say this is Peter Thiel believes in a sort of nega or bizarro theosis. So theosis, right, is the idea that God, through grace, imbues us with a divine life. And our glorified bodies, right, is a divinized body. What Thiel is arguing is that, no, actually, we can naturefy grace. So, like, what he's saying is we will become gods because we'll figure out the technology to do it, which is why it's important to say, like you said, it's a Gnostic liberation. We will leave the chrysalises of our current bodies. We will become the beautiful singularity butterflies flapping around, unencumbered by these, prisons of flesh, because we'll have uploaded ourselves into the singularity, into all of this data. And so, but if that's what your belief is, then a Luddite is the Antichrist, because it's preventing that liberation. And furthermore, to dork out one more time, this is where he has sort of inverted Girard. We don't have time to really explain all of this, but tell me if I'm wrong to sort of shorthand this. Girard says that all of the other religions of the world are based on myths of violence, right? And so they're
especially primitive religion.
Yeah,
right?
so they create myths to so to speak cover up foundational violences for societies. And then, of course, what we actually love about Girard, why we often talk about him, is he says, starting with the Old Testament, then in the New in Jesus Christ, that they uncover the myths of the world and sort of lay bare the scapegoating, mechanism. But Thiel is acting like Christianity is like the ultimate myth, but it's the myth that has to be used, that's really been like hiding the sort of violence inherent in incarnate life. And so to overcome the myth of even Christianity is to say we have to leave humanity behind and become superhumanity.
Right. So
that's Gnosticism, right? I mean, it's at least heresy, yes?
Yeah, he presents, I think, a fundamentally different anthropology or understanding of the human person. And it's alluring precisely because of the power of technology. So if you're someone who raises any concerns about this sort of thing, oftentimes the important technological breakthroughs are sort of shoved in your face. So it's like, oh, you're opposed to like heart transplants, or, like, do you walk everywhere that you go? But yeah, I mean, you threw a lot out there that could be like unpacked further. I think this goes back to I think it's great that you brought up the notion of theosis, just in this sense. Like, the original temptation to Adam and Eve was that you can become like God
without the cross.
It's fast. Satan presents the same promise that God does, because God's intention is
that first Antichrist.
God's intention is to divinize us. I mean, I think we sort of lost this notion somewhat in how we've thought about things, but like St. Peter says, like, we become partakers of the divine nature. So God wants to give us his life, but it's through a specific, like, it's through the sacraments, specifically through the Via Crucis, this way of the cross. There's no shortcut there.
Right.
But I think Satan in the garden, and then those who basically sell their souls to the technocratic paradigm, they say we can offer you this kind of like divinization, this kind of liberation, but it's something that they're selling.
Well, and I mean, I think, this is another thing where he himself by name brings up other tech billionaires and sort of pits his vision of liberation as against or different than theirs, right? So he brings up Elon Musk. You may have heard him in the news. Speaking of corridors of power. And he makes this thing, right, where he goes like, look, even if Elon pulls it off and he gets on his little rocket ships and we go to Mars and colonize Mars, remember, but he says, but decadence and not apathy, what's the word he uses?
Asadia?
No, Teal. Whatever we're saying, right? Like, this lull in technology is a very obvious word I'll remember. Okay. But he goes, it will follow us with us. Stagnation, right? He talks like stagnation is like a inheritable, not even a virus, man. He acts like it's sort of like a genetic condition and we'll just carry that genetic malfunction to Mars.
That's kind of funny, because we imagine ourselves like, if we get to Mars, like, all of us will be wearing like fancy, like, glittery suits, and the NFL will get like instant replay correct and whatnot. But like, you watch movies like Star Wars, and like, you can get space exploration and sort of like clunky vehicles.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is like, some of the more attuned sci-fi, like the movie Serenity gets at this aspect, right? Is clearly there is this sort of liberal enlightenment enters the sort of like manifest destiny idea, but then thrown into outer space that goes, hey guys, if we figure out the technology it takes to make it to Mars, that also means we've figured out all of our other problems. And to Till's credit, he points out, well, no, it might just be that you bring our stupid ideas to other planets. And you go, true enough, but what's Teal's answer? He goes, no worries. You don't need to colonize another planet. Yeah. We need to colonize the digital singularity, and we don't need to escape Earth. We need to escape our bodies.
Right.
That's what he's saying.
Well, and this is why I think it's such a strategic moment for the church, and I should be careful using that term, because we've been talking about anti-utilitarianism. But what I mean by that is, like, the developments that are taking place, which are on so many people's minds, I think present a real opportunity for Catholics to be to state clearly like what the gospel actually says. So I always blank on the name of the Vatican document on artificial intelligence. I think it's Nova et
Antiqua et Nova.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And so like that understanding of what constitutes like knowledge and knowing, sort of like presenting that as like analogous to human consciousness. Some of what Till is presenting as liberative, like all of those ideas almost could be used as like foils to say like this is what the gospel is truly about. I think it's a real. I mean, I think it's like a prescient moment, for lack of a better term.
I agree. And look, since we're naming big names in the news that most people are. I mean. But I always had big worries about, like a sort of Rod Dreher understanding of like a Benedict option where we sort of escape and, let Rome burn while we sort of figure things out. We can't do that if billionaires are talking about the goal of humanity should be to leave our bodies behind. Mm-hmm. If he's talking about chrysalis butterfly effect, there is no time like any other time in the past where we must stand in the public square and say we refuse to understand humanity in this way. And I understand, like again, trying to be charitable, not just like throwing aspersions to something in multiple places I've said that I don't agree with. I understand when it comes to thinking about your kids, or just that we need to have places where people can go recuperate. I very much understand that we need a sort of monastic element so people can escape the sort of technocratic paradigm to, rehash, refurbish, revitalize. But we have to go back and proclaim the gospel loudly for the spirit of our age, which is to say we are body and soul. God will divinize us. Theosis is won through the cross, and it is not an escape. It's not the new Gnosticism, and it won't be won by technology, nor will it be won by Luddite escapism from technology.
This is where the corporal works of mercy are countercultural. They're also evangelistic, where, in that sort of world, in the sort of worldview that we've been discussing on the show today, like clothing the naked, correcting error, burying the dead, you don't have time for those sorts of things. Like, they're a waste of time. We need to get on to the serious business of sort of like attaining the singularity. But, going back to Stanley Hauerwas, who we've mentioned on the show before, like, God gives us all the time in the world to raise our children, to care for those with disabilities, on. And those sorts of things, I think, are a powerful witness to those around us who might be, I think, like, led astray by the sort of like salvation that folks like Till bring to the fore.
So, Bud, we didn't word for word recapitulate the lost episode.
No, I think it went better this time. Forget the lost episode.
Yeah, it's done.
I'm going to delete that one.
I will say that the lost episode, we maybe like had more specific quotes, but I have to admit, like, now that we've lived life without the lost episode being aired, I think the relevant quotes made the rounds.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, when I recorded that episode, I had my laptop open. I was kind of like referring to specific parts of the interview, but you like really succinctly summarized some of the key ideas, so I thought it went well today.
It's a wild ride. I think if you want to have a pulse of both where very powerful and rich people are, and also just get the sheer weirdness of like what is actually being debated in public. Like, so, pinch yourself, you're not dreaming. 2025 is the future. You should go read it. It's on New York Times. You can go watch it. So that's, but I think I recommend watching it, as scary as it is.
Yeah, right. No, I think it can be helpful, and then come back to this episode, re-listen to this one.
Yeah.
Share it with your friends.
Absolutely. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar. I hope that nothing happens as we're wrapping this up, because I don't think we could do it a third time. No. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for making this show possible. You guys might not be, you might not have PayPal money, but you have the good work that you guys have been doing for livestock with your feed. And like Bud said before, agricultural state, we are proud to be supported by Imogene Ingredients. Bud, quite a trip. I have good hopes that the signal's clear on this one, and hopefully people aren't missing out too much by us re-recording the episode.
Yeah, those topics are fun to tackle. I was looking forward to today's show, and I think it came off well, so happy to have it in the books. If you do want to join us in our prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio, we pray the rosary on air at 4:30 a.m., 6 a.m., and 10 in the morning. Later, 8:30 p.m. Also, the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 2:57. Set an alarm. But you can pray the rosary anytime, anywhere with us by using the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Absolutely. Make sure to go over to iowacatholicradio.com. You can go on our business sponsor page, check out the people who make it possible for these shows to air. Maybe send an email, drop by, call, whatever, social media, and tell them thank you. Thank you to our business sponsors for making it possible. Then go to iowacatholicradio.com to the events page to see what we are up to in and around the Iowa Catholic Radio listening area. Bud, the big one coming up, you know what it is. State Fair time.
Oh, yes.
Of course. So that's in August. I know we have a little bit of July left, but as always, we will have the Iowa Catholic Radio booth, so make sure to see us out there at the fair. And then, of course, make sure to prayerfully consider donating to iowacatholicradio.com. You can do that by calling or texting 515-223-1150 or going online to hit the donate button to make these shows possible. Bud, as always, great show.
I'm looking forward to the fair. I signed up for my time slot, so we'll see everyone out there.
Absolutely. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.